The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night. It wasn't just another political talk show, this one had the kind of tension that no script could hide. Van Jones sat poised, smooth as ever, his voice dripping with the confidence of a man used to shaping public opinion. Across from him sat Denzel Washington, calm, still, and unflinchingly focused. You could feel it in the air, something was about to break. The discussion started harmless enough, talk of unity, responsibility, and moral leadership. Van spoke in polished phrases, his tone rehearsed like a sermon for the cameras. America needs compassion, he said, we need to rise above division. But Denzel's face didn't move. He'd heard too many people use those same words as a shield to hide behind. He leaned forward slowly, his deep voice cutting through the studio hum. Van, he said, every syllable deliberate, you keep preaching about truth, but when was the last time you lived it? The room froze. The host tried to pivot, the producer whispered to the control booth, but Denzel wasn't done. You talk about moral clarity while standing next to corruption. You tell the public to stay strong while bending for your sponsors. That's not leadership, that's theater. Van chuckled, nervously. Come on, Denzel, we're just having a discussion. But Denzel's eyes locked on him, unmoving. No, we're not. We're living in a time where words are weapons, and you've been firing blanks. The audience went dead silent. The camera zoomed in. For the first time, Van didn't have a script to hide behind, and America was about to see what happens when Denzel Washington stops acting and starts exposing. Van shifted in his seat, his polished confidence cracking under Denzel's unflinching stare. The audience could almost hear the tension pulsing through the studio floor. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to Van Jones, the master of smooth talk and calm control. Denzel, he said with a shaky laugh, you know how this works. I don't answer to outrage, I answer to facts. Denzel leaned forward, the glint of fire in his eyes sharp enough to pierce the lights. Facts, he repeated, his voice low but thunderous. You cherry-pick facts to build a brand, Van. You cry on camera one day, then turn around and defend the very people you claim to fight against. That's not journalism, that's performance. Gasps rippled through the live audience. Van tried to reclaim his footing, waving a hand dismissively. You're oversimplifying it. You think change happens overnight? You think passion without politics fixes anything? His voice trembled just enough to betray him. Denzel didn't blink. Change starts when people stop lying to themselves. You built a platform preaching justice, but now you're protecting privilege. He pointed slightly toward Van, not as an attack, but as a verdict. Every time you dodge a hard truth, Denzel continued, you tell the next kid watching at home that integrity doesn't matter. You sell the dream, then kill it behind closed doors. The audience murmured. Van's jaw tightened. He tried to steer the conversation back, but Denzel wasn't giving him an inch. You can't wrap corruption in compassion, Denzel said, voice rising. You can't play both sides and call it balance. You either stand for truth or you stand for yourself. The studio lights flickered slightly, as if reacting to the heat. In that moment, Van's trademark smile vanished. What was left wasn't a commentator, it was a man exposed. And Denzel, calm but burning, wasn't done yet. Van Jones finally straightened up, his patience cracking like thin glass. The studio was so quiet that even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. You think you know everything, Denzel, he said, his voice dropping its calm tone, the mask slipping away. You stand up there acting like a moral compass, but where were you when the country was falling apart? Making speeches? Shooting movies? The crowd gasped. It was the first real punch thrown, and it hit hard. Denzel didn't flinch. He just stared at Van, the faintest trace of a smile on his face, the kind that says you just stepped into the ring for real. You think this is about celebrity? Denzel asked, his voice deep and deliberate. I've lived long enough to know fame doesn't mean freedom. I'm not here to trend, Van. I'm here because too many people trusted voices like yours, and ended up betrayed. Van shook his head. You don't get it, man. You're out of touch. You don't deal with policy, with power, with the media machine. You can afford to say whatever you want. I can't. Denzel leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked. That's your excuse? You can't tell the truth because it might cost you something? Then you're not a journalist, you're a salesman. Van's eyes flared. You think it's that simple? You can't dismantle a corrupt system by yelling at it from a talk show. Denzel's voice sharpened, cutting through the tension like a blade. Then stop feeding it. You can't play both sides of the fire and expect not to burn. You sit here preaching morality while cashing checks from chaos. That's not strategy, that's surrender. The audience broke into murmurs, cameras panning between the two men. Denzel sat back, composed but fierce, his words echoing through the studio. You want to talk about rebuilding America, Van? Then start by rebuilding your spine. The silence that followed was electric, heavy, dangerous, and unforgettable. The tension in the studio had turned radioactive. The audience leaned forward in stunned silence, every word now felt like it might ignite the air itself. Van Jones crossed his arms, the fake calm gone. You know what, Denzel, he said, smirking. You talk about integrity, but you've never been under the kind of fire I've faced. It's easy to be righteous when you've got millions in the bank and fans worshipping you. Try doing what I do, speaking truth to power while keeping your job. Denzel's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room did. He tilted his head slightly, the look of a man who's seen through every disguise. So that's it, he said quietly. You traded your truth for a paycheck, and now you want sympathy for it? Van leaned forward, his tone turning sharp. You think you're some kind of savior? You make movies about justice, I live it every day. You don't know what real risk is, Denzel. Denzel's laugh was soft, low, and dangerous. Risk, he said. You're right, Van, I don't risk losing my soul every time I turn on a camera. The audience gasped. Cameras zoomed in tight. Van tried to speak, but Denzel cut in, his voice now booming through the studio. You keep saying you fight for the people, but when those people suffer, where are you? Tweeting empathy from your phone? Hosting panels while the system you defend keeps breaking them? Van slammed his hand on the table. At least I'm doing something. You think yelling makes you righteous? Denzel leaned closer, his tone softening, but somehow more dangerous than ever. It's not yelling when you speak the truth, Van. It's a mirror, and maybe you just don't like what it's showing you. The crowd erupted in whispers. The moderator tried to step in, but neither man moved. Denzel's eyes stayed locked on Van's. You say you're fighting for justice, he said, voice steady as steel. Then stop negotiating with lies. For a moment, no one breathed. The camera caught everything, the glare, the silence, the truth too sharp to ignore. America was watching, and this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Van Jones took a deep breath, forcing a shaky smile that fooled no one. The studio lights gleamed off the sweat forming on his temple. He tried to steady his voice, the way he always did when the truth cornered him. You know, Denzel, he began, tone dripping with forced calm, I think you misunderstand what this job is. We don't live in a world of black and white. We live in gray. And if you don't learn to navigate that gray, you don't survive. Denzel's eyes narrowed. The way he sat, perfectly still, made every syllable that followed sound like a hammer striking steel. That's your problem, Van. You've convinced yourself that survival is success. But surviving in a broken system isn't strength, it's surrender. Van's composure wavered. You think you can just walk in here, lecture me on morality, and walk away like a hero? Denzel leaned forward, voice lowering into something almost calm, almost. No, I came here to remind you that heroes don't walk away. They stand in the fire until the truth burns everything false to the ground. A ripple ran through the crowd, a low murmur that grew as Denzel spoke. His tone wasn't theatrical. It was raw, weighted with conviction. You want to talk about gray areas? Fine. But when the lines between truth and lies blur, someone has to draw them again. And that's what this moment is, Van. You either draw the line, or you become the blur. Van swallowed hard, his confidence gone. The camera zoomed in on his face, the flicker of guilt, the tremor in his jaw. He tried to fight back. "You're turning this into a spectacle," he said, voice cracking. "You don't understand how dangerous this kind of talk is." Denzel shook his head slowly. "What's dangerous is pretending neutrality in the face of injustice. That's how lies become law." For a moment, Van couldn't respond. The silence was suffocating. The audience sat frozen as Denzel leaned back in his chair, eyes unyielding. "This isn't theater, Van," he said, his final words cutting through the air. "This is what truth looks like when it stops asking for permission." The moderator whispered something into his earpiece. The show was over. But everyone knew, this moment wouldn't end with the cameras. It was already spreading like wildfire. When the cameras finally cut to black, the studio was still vibrating with tension. Nobody moved. Crew members whispered in disbelief, their headsets crackling with static. One of the producers muttered, "That's going viral in 5 minutes." He was wrong, it took 2. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media like a tsunami. Hashtags exploded across every platform, hashtag Denzel vs. Van, hashtag Truth in the Fire, hashtag Enough Van. Within hours, millions had watched the moment Denzel's calm turned to thunder. People weren't just sharing it, they were living it. Memes, reaction videos, debates on live streams, the entire digital world had become an arena. At CNN headquarters, phones were melting with calls from sponsors. Some demanded damage control. Others whispered that Denzel had said what they'd been too afraid to. Van Jones, sitting in his office, stared at the looping playback on his screen, the exact second Denzel's words hit, "Heroes don't walk away." He paused it, the line echoing in his mind like a taunt and a truth all at once. Meanwhile, Denzel sat alone in his car, parked under a flickering streetlight. The glow from his phone screen reflected off his face as messages poured in, praise, threats, gratitude, outrage. But he didn't smile. He just scrolled in silence, the weight of what he'd unleashed settling on his shoulders. He hadn't come for chaos, but truth rarely walks in quietly. By midnight, the debate wasn't just about Van or Denzel. It was about the system, the blurred line between truth and performance, activism and ambition. Pundits argued, politicians tweeted, late-night hosts joked nervously. And through it all, one clip kept replaying on every network, Denzel's voice, unwavering, "When you stop asking permission to speak the truth, that's when change begins." The world had heard him. And no one, not even Van Jones, could put the genie back in the bottle. Morning broke like a hangover across America. Every screen, from living rooms to airport terminals, glowed with the same image, Denzel Washington's piercing stare, frozen mid-sentence, the caption below reading, "When truth stops asking permission." News anchors spoke with the urgency usually reserved for national crises. The confrontation between Denzel Washington and Van Jones has sparked outrage and admiration alike, one declared. Was it bravery or arrogance? Another asked. The truth was simpler, it was a spark that caught fire. Political commentators swarmed to claim the narrative. Conservative pundits called Denzel reckless and dangerous. Progressive voices hailed him as the conscience America forgot it had. Hashtags like hashtag Truth Without Fear trended worldwide. Every outlet scrambled to replay, dissect, and monetize the moment, but none could control it. Van Jones released a carefully worded statement mid-morning, attempting damage control. Public discourse should unite, not divide, it read. But the comments section beneath was brutal. Thousands replying with the same quote from Denzel, "Neutrality in the face of injustice is surrender." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Denzel refused interviews. His publicist begged him to say something, anything. But Denzel stayed silent. Instead, he visited a community center downtown, slipping through the side door, unnoticed. He shook hands, listened, helped stack boxes of food. No cameras. No press. Just action. Back in Washington, whispers reached the political sphere. Senators mentioned his name in closed-door meetings, aides exchanged nervous glances. A Hollywood actor had managed what decades of politicians hadn't, made truth sound dangerous again. By noon, even international outlets had picked it up. London, Paris, Tokyo, Denzel's stare had become a symbol, a question: what happens when truth refuses to stay polite? The answer was beginning to unfold. America wasn't just watching anymore. It was waking up. Van Jones wasn't sleeping. He hadn't really slept since the confrontation aired. Every major outlet wanted his exclusive response, and his PR team insisted he take one. Control the narrative before it controls you, they said. So he agreed, one last appearance, live. But deep down, he knew the story was already out of his hands. When the red light blinked on, Van sat straighter than usual. His voice was calm, deliberate, almost rehearsed. "I respect Denzel Washington," he began, pausing just long enough to sound sincere. But what happened on that stage wasn't about truth. It was about spectacle, emotion over reason. America doesn't need another lecture. It needs leadership. The audience clapped politely, but the energy was hollow. People weren't buying it. Within seconds, social media lit up again, clips of Denzel's confrontation cut against Van's new statements. One tweet went viral instantly: Denzel spoke from conviction. Van speaking from a script. Producers backstage exchanged worried looks. The ratings were high, but so was the backlash. Every word Van said only amplified the echo of Denzel's silence. Because while Van was talking, Denzel still hadn't said a single word since that night. No interviews, no tweets, no clarifications. Just silence, and it was deafening. The more Van tried to explain, the smaller he seemed. Viewers sensed it: truth doesn't argue, it lingers. Later that night, Denzel was spotted leaving a small independent theater in L.A. A journalist shouted, "Do you have anything to say to Van Jones?" He stopped, turned slightly, and simply replied, "You don't need to talk when the truth's already speaking." Then he walked away. That 5-second clip hit harder than any speech. The next morning, major headlines read: Van speaks. Denzel doesn't. Guess who everyone believes? America had chosen its voice, and it wasn't the loud one. By day 3, America was no longer just talking, it was dividing. News outlets turned the Denzel-Van clash into a cultural war. Every show, every podcast, every influencer picked a side. On one end, hashtags like #StandWithDenzel flooded timelines. On the other, #VanForReason tried desperately to stay relevant. Late-night comedians cracked nervous jokes, sensing that this wasn't just celebrity drama, it was something heavier. The silence of Denzel Washington had transformed into something no PR team could manufacture: myth. His single phrase, "You don't need to talk when the truth's already speaking," became graffiti, protest banners, even a t-shirt slogan spreading through college campuses. For the first time in years, Hollywood and Washington weren't driving the conversation, the people were. Meanwhile, Van Jones doubled down. His team booked him on back-to-back talk shows, each appearance more defensive than the last. He called Denzel a man playing hero on TV. The internet exploded again. "At least he's playing it better than you," one viral tweet read. Every attempt Van made to reclaim dignity backfired. His sincerity felt rehearsed, his reasoning too polished. Denzel's restraint had become his weapon, and it was slicing through the noise like a blade. In a quiet cafe in New York, two journalists discussed it over coffee. "Why do you think this hit so hard?" one asked. The other smiled. "Because people are starving for truth." And Denzel fed them in 5 words. Across the country, in homes, offices, and classrooms, people weren't arguing about movies or politics anymore. They were asking, Who's really telling the truth in this country? For years, America had been shouting. Now, because of one moment, it had finally started listening. A week later, the noise had started to fade, but the echo of it hadn't. Every network that once looped the confrontation between Denzel and Van Jones now struggled to move on. Ratings dipped. Audiences were tired of the spin, the repetition, the endless talking heads dissecting something they could never really touch. And yet, outside the media bubble, something was happening. In community halls, barbershops, and college campuses, people were still quoting Denzel. His silence had become a kind of rallying cry. The truth's already speaking. It wasn't just a phrase anymore, it was a filter people were using on everything: politics, headlines, even conversations with friends. Van Jones had gone quiet too. His final public statement was short: "I spoke too much and listened too little." It was the closest thing to surrender he could manage, and even that admission was buried under days of new scandals. Meanwhile, Denzel Washington remained unseen. No press, no interviews, no red carpets. A few blurry photos surfaced of him walking in a park, head down, hands in his pockets, but that was it. It was as if he'd said everything he ever needed to say in those few moments of confrontation, and then simply stepped aside. But the country didn't forget. Months later, during a live debate on media ethics, a college student stood up and asked, "Why do we talk about truth like it's entertainment?" The room went quiet. That question, born from one viral moment, was now bigger than either Denzel or Van. Because Denzel hadn't just confronted a man, he had confronted a system. One that thrived on noise, and feared silence. And in that silence, America found something it had lost long ago: a reason to listen again. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. You can spin stories, twist facts, or hide behind cameras. But in the end, the truth stands there, calm, patient, and undefeated. That's all I had to say.